Detroit, 1960. A cold wind swept through the streets outside the Wayne State Auditorium as families, musicians, and local talent scouts shuffled inside for Motown's annual youth showcase. The building buzzed with excitement, filled with the chatter of proud parents and the nervous laughter of children clutching sheet music to their chests. But backstage, away from the bright chatter of the crowd, a 10-year-old boy stood alone in the dim corridor, small, blind, trembling, and desperately trying to steady the wild rhythm of his heartbeat. His name was Stevland Judkins. The world would one day know him as Stevie Wonder, but tonight he wasn't a legend. He wasn't a prodigy. He was just a terrified child who didn't believe he belonged on that stage. His hands shook as he held a battered harmonica, the only thing in the world that made sense to him. He pressed it to his lips, hoping a single note might calm him. It didn't. The fear stayed. The doubt stayed. And yet he knew. He couldn't turn back. His mentor for the night, a Motown assistant named Clarence Briggs, knelt beside him, smoothing out the boy's small collar. "Stevie," he whispered, "you don't have to be perfect. Just be you." Stevie swallowed hard, gripping the harmonica so tightly his knuckles whitened. "What if they don't like me?" he whispered back. Clarence smiled, placing a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "Son, they've never heard anything like you." Stevie didn't believe that. Not yet. He only felt the tremor in his hands, the hollowness in his stomach, the crushing uncertainty that comes when a child stands at the edge of something enormous. From the stage came the muffled sound of applause as another young performer finished their act. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. "Next up, a young musician you won't forget, Stevie Judkins." The words struck Stevie like lightning. His breath caught. His legs weakened. Every instinct screamed to run. Clarence gently took his arm. "It's time." The stagehand opened the curtain. A beam of warm light flooded the narrow hallway, stretching towards Stevie like a bridge he didn't know how to cross. The roar of the audience swelled. Hundreds of strangers waiting, watching. Stevie lifted his chin, blind eyes blinking toward the brightness. He felt the heat of the lights on his skin, the vibration of footsteps echoing from the wooden stage floor, the hum of anticipation in the air. His fear was overwhelming, his doubt almost unbearable, but somewhere beneath the trembling, beneath the panic, was a spark, a tiny flicker of something he didn't yet understand, something the world would one day call genius. Stevie took a trembling breath, tightened his grip on the harmonica, and stepped into the light. Stevie's first step onto the stage landed with a soft tap, barely audible, but to him it felt like an earthquake. The wooden boards vibrated beneath his shoes, carrying the tremors of his own heartbeat straight up through his legs. He could hear the shifting of the crowd as they leaned forward, whispering, trying to catch their first glimpse of the small blind boy from the east side, whose name they had never heard before. The announcer guided him gently toward the center, but when Stevie reached the microphone stand, he froze. His breath hitched. His free hand hovered in the air, lost in the vastness of the space. It was the first time he had ever stood in front of so many people, their breath, their murmurs, their expectation. It pressed against his skin like a weight he wasn't sure he could carry. Stevie held the harmonica against his chest, gripping it like a lifeline as fear wrapped around him like cold fog. A faint laugh rippled through the audience, not cruel but curious, confused. Some wondered if he knew where he was. Others whispered that he looked too nervous to play. A few children giggled, not understanding the magnitude of the moment. Stevie's lower lip trembled. He felt the laughter hit him like a stone. His mind raced. "They think I don't belong here." He shifted his feet, trying to find grounding in a world he couldn't see. Clarence, watching from the wings, clasped his hands tightly, whispering, "Come on, Stevie, don't let go now." Stevie wanted to play. He wanted to prove the voice inside him wrong, the voice telling him he was too small, too scared, too different. But the fear anchoring him in place was relentless. For a moment, the audience held its breath, unsure whether this tiny musician would even lift his instrument. And then Stevie heard it. A faint, familiar hum from the back of the stage. A musician tuning a guitar, just a quick soft strum. But to Stevie, it was a signal, a reminder. Music wasn't a stage or an audience or a spotlight. Music was vibration, warmth, belonging, something he could feel with his palms, with his ribs, with his very bones. That single strum steadied him. He lifted his chin slightly, feeling the air shift. Slowly, painfully slowly, he raised the harmonica to his lips. The audience fell silent again, leaning in, waiting. Stevie closed his eyes, though they were already closed to the world, and whispered to himself, just one note, just start with one. He inhaled deeply. The room exhaled with him, and then he played. A small, trembling note, thin and fragile, but it carried a spark the audience instantly felt, a warmth that softened their murmurs. It wasn't confidence yet, it wasn't mastery, but it was the beginning of something extraordinary. That first trembling note drifted into the auditorium like a thin ribbon of sound, small, uncertain, almost fragile enough to break. But something about it stopped every whisper in the room. The audience leaned in instinctively, drawn not by volume or perfection, but by the raw sincerity woven into that single breath of music. Stevie felt the vibration of the note come back. To him, through the mic stand, through the floor, through the air itself. It steadied him more than any applause ever could. He closed his eyes tighter, pressing the harmonica to his lips again, letting another soft tone escape. This one was a little stronger, a little clearer. His breath warmed, his fingers loosened their tense grip. Inside that tiny body, something began to unfurl, a small, flickering thread of confidence stretching toward the sound. The crowd, sensing the shift, grew, still in a way even the announcer hadn't expected. Parents stopped whispering, children stopped fidgeting. A man in the third row lowered his program slowly, eyebrows lifting as if he were hearing something impossible. The second note curled into a third, then a fourth, each one shakier than the last, but each revealing a little more of the boy's hidden spark. The musicians backstage turned their heads, eyes narrowing curiously. "Who is that kid?" one murmured. Clarence, still in the wings, pressed a hand to his chest, tears already forming. He knew this moment mattered, not because Stevie was perfect, but because he was trying, reaching, pushing through fear bigger than he was. Every breath Stevie took carried years of doubt, loneliness, and the determination of a child who had learned to understand the world through the shapes of sound. Then something clicked. Whether it was the warmth of the crowd's silence, the hum of the wooden boards beneath his feet, or the lingering echo of his own breath, Stevie suddenly felt a spark ignite inside him, small but undeniable. He shifted his stance, lifting his chin, and played a short, trembling phrase. The melody wavered but held, filled with innocence and aching vulnerability. Gasps rippled through the auditorium. A woman in the front row whispered, "Oh my, this boy!" A teenager elbowed his friend, wide-eyed. Even the chuckles that had drifted earlier were now gone, replaced by a reverent hush. Stevie felt it. He felt the acceptance before he heard it, like warm air brushing his skin. His breath deepened, his shoulders relaxed, and for the first time that night, he wasn't playing to prove anything. He was playing to feel alive. And as the final note of that fragile phrase sailed across the room, the audience realized they weren't just listening to a nervous child. They were hearing the first heartbeat of a legend. The audience remained frozen in awe, suspended in a kind of stunned silence that wrapped itself around Stevie like a warm blanket. For the first time since stepping onto the stage, he didn't feel small. He didn't feel misplaced. The vibration of his last note lingered in the wood beneath his feet, and he felt it, really felt it, echo back into his chest. That echo lit something inside him, something he hadn't known how to name at age 10, belonging. He lifted the harmonica again, steadier this time, and released a new phrase, still soft, still trembling, but shaped with a budding sense of purpose. The melody rose like a fragile beam of light, pushing through darkness. He added a small run, nothing rehearsed, nothing planned, just a burst of instinct. The audience gasped. They hadn't expected it. He hadn't expected it. And in that tiny spark of surprise, Stevie felt the first burst of joy he'd ever experienced on a stage. A guitarist backstage, an older man who had played in clubs Stevie only dreamed of, leaned forward, eyebrows lifting, higher, with each note. "He's not just playing," he whispered. "He's feeling." The pianist beside him nodded slowly, stunned. The murmurs backstage spread like wildfire. Adults who had dismissed Stevie as just another nervous kid now stared at each other with wide eyes, silently acknowledging the impossible. This child had something different, something rare, something untamed. The audience sensed it too. Their silence wasn't polite, it was devotional, the kind of silence that wrapped around new greatness, the same way dawn wraps around a rising sun. And Stevie, still trembling but now guided by a current deeper than fear, pressed into another small run, this one a little braver, a little brighter. His fingers danced with the shy confidence of someone discovering a hidden part of himself. Then came the moment that changed everything. Stevie played a sudden burst of quick, playful notes, hesitant at first, then blooming into a tiny flourish of confidence. The sound was imperfect, wobbly, but undeniably alive. The audience erupted. Applause burst through the room, like a wave crashing against the stage. Cheers, gasps, even a few shouts of awe rippled through the auditorium. Stevie stumbled back a tiny step, startled by the sudden explosion of sound. He had never heard a crowd cheer for him. His heart pounded, but this time it wasn't fear. It was electricity. He tightened his grip on the harmonica, breath trembling with disbelief. Clarence clapped wildly. From the wings, tears streaming down his face. And for the first time that night, Stevie allowed himself a small, shy smile. He hadn't planned to shine. He hadn't even believed he could. But as the applause roared around him, Stevie Wonder, the legend yet unborn, took his first wobbly step into destiny. The applause didn't fade quickly. It swelled, growing louder, fuller, richer, as if the crowd had suddenly realized they were witnessing something they would talk about for decades. Stevie stood frozen in the glow of it, his small shoulders rising and falling with each shaky breath. He clutched the harmonica with both hands, unsure what to do next. Part of him wanted to run off stage and hide, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. But another part, the tiny spark that had flickered awake inside him, wanted to stay, wanted to explore, wanted to feel that warmth again. Stevie lifted his chin a little higher, sensing the audience's energy washing over him like a tide. The wooden floor vibrated beneath his shoes with every clap, grounding him. Slowly, cautiously, he raised the harmonica back to his lips, signaling he wasn't finished. Instantly, the applause softened into breathless silence. The crowd leaned forward in unison, their excitement replaced by reverence. Stevie inhaled deeply, letting the air settle in his chest before releasing another small phrase, this one smoother, more controlled. The notes floated through the auditorium, weaving a tender, uncertain melody. It wasn't polished, it wasn't rehearsed, but it had heart, pure, unfiltered heart. A woman in the second row pressed a hand to her mouth, whispering, "He's just a baby." A man behind her shook his head slowly, stunned. "That kid's got soul." Backstage, the pianist placed a hand over his heart, feeling something stir that he hadn't felt in years. Clarence wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve, whispering to no one, "Come on, Stevie. You were born for this." Stevie felt the warmth in the room, sensed the air shifting around him, and followed his instincts into a slightly bolder sequence. His fingers moved with growing clarity, his breath steadier now. The melody quivered at the edges, but it glowed from within. Then Stevie took a chance. Without thinking, without planning, he played a small improvisation, a tiny burst of creativity that felt like diving off a cliff. It wasn't perfect. The middle note cracked. But the crack didn't break the spell, it deepened it. It made him human, vulnerable, extraordinary. The audience gasped again, not from shock but from tenderness. They were watching a child fight through fear in real time and break through it. They were witnessing the moment talent awakens, raw and trembling. Stevie felt something inside him shift, as if a door had opened in his chest. The fear didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It became fuel. A trembling smile crept onto his face as he finished the phrase. The audience rose halfway to their feet, unable to contain themselves. And in that moment, Stevie realized something life-altering. He wasn't just a scared boy holding a harmonica. He was a scared boy holding a gift the world had just recognized for the very first time. Stevie stood there, breathing hard, his tiny chest rising and falling as the applause gradually softened into a gentle hush. He could feel the crowd leaning in again, waiting, wanting, believing in him in a way he had never believed in himself. The warm stage lights kissed his cheeks, and the vibrations of the room hummed through the soles of his shoes. For the first time that night, the fear inside him didn't scream. It whispered, it trembled, but it no longer controlled him. Stevie raised the harmonica once more, that battered little instrument feeling suddenly lighter in his small hands. He brought it to his lips, and before he played, he allowed himself a tiny moment of stillness. A moment where he listened not to the audience, not to the stage creaks, but to the quiet courage blooming inside him. When he finally breathed in, the whole auditorium breathed with him. He released a new melody, longer, stronger, shaped by the shaky confidence of a child stepping into his own shadow and realizing it fit him. The notes danced upward, still imperfect, still trembling, but sewn together with something unmistakable: soul. The melody drifted across the room like a warm breeze, brushing against every listener's heart. A woman in the balcony put her hand over her chest and whispered, "He's going to be someone. I can feel it." A father in the back wiped his eyes, embarrassed but unable to stop the emotion rising inside him. The musicians backstage stepped closer to the curtain, drawn like moths to a spark no one had expected from a boy so young, so small, so unsure. Stevie added a tiny flourish at the end of the phrase, a playful wobble of notes. The crowd erupted into soft laughter, touched by the innocence behind it. Clarence watched from the wings, shaking his head in awe. "He's finding it," he whispered. "He's finding himself." And Stevie was. With each passing second, each trembling phrase, he was peeling back layers of insecurity and revealing a glimpse of the brilliance that lived beneath. He played one more short run, this one steadier, cleaner, and the crowd gasped again, shocked by the speed of his growth right before their eyes. Stevie pulled the harmonica from his lips and stood motionless, listening. The crowd didn't clap yet. They didn't cheer. They just absorbed him, absorbed the raw, tender magic of a child discovering who he was. That silence wrapped around Stevie like the warmest embrace he'd ever felt. And in that moment, for the first time in his life, the terrified 10-year-old understood one profound truth. The stage wasn't something to fear. It was something waiting for him. The silence in the auditorium deepened, not empty, but full of awe, full of emotion, full of the fragile magic this small boy had just created. Stevie felt it pressing softly against his skin, warming him, steadying him. He stood at the center of the stage with his harmonica lowered, his shoulders rising and falling with each uneven breath. Then, from somewhere in the audience, a child's voice whispered, "Go on, Stevie." The words floated to him like a tiny spark. Stevie's lips parted in a shy smile. He lifted the harmonica again, slowly, deliberately, knowing this would be his last phrase of the night. The hall remained perfectly still as he inhaled, his breath trembling with a mix of fear, courage, and something new, joy. He played a gentle closing melody, soft, vulnerable, stitched together from instinct and hope. It began with a shaky note that wavered before settling, then moved into a small, uncertain flourish that carried the innocence of a child who had never been applauded before. Today, each sound reached the audience like a tender confession. Seniors wiped their eyes. Parents pulled their children closer. Young musicians in the room leaned forward, realizing they were witnessing a beginning, an origin moment, a spark that would one day ignite into one of the brightest flames in music history. Stevie's final note quivered at the end, nearly breaking, but its imperfection only made the moment more human, more breathtaking. When the last vibration faded into the rafters, Stevie lowered his harmonica and stood perfectly still. The explosion came all at once. The audience rose to their feet in a roaring, standing ovation that shook the auditorium walls. Cheers, whistles, applause so thunderous it felt like a physical force pushing against Stevie's small frame. He stumbled back a step, overwhelmed. No one had ever cheered for him like this. Not at school, not on the street, not anywhere. His mouth fell open, his throat tightened, his blind eyes filled with tears he didn't know how to hold back. Clarence ran onto the stage, catching Stevie just as the boy's knees buckled from emotion. "You did it, Stevie," he whispered, hugging him tightly. Stevie clung to him, trembling. They liked it?" he asked through tears. Clarence laughed, voice breaking. "They didn't just like it. You moved them." Stevie lifted his head, hearing the crowd chant his name. "Stevie! Stevie! Stevie!" And something inside him shifted forever. The insecure, terrified child still lived inside him, but now he had a new companion standing beside that fear. Belief. And as the ovation thundered on, Stevie Wonder took his first real breath as an artist. Backstage, the moment Clarence guided Stevie beyond the curtain, the roar of the crowd softened into a muffled echo, but the tremble in Stevie's small hands only intensified. The boy clung to his mentor's shirt, breath shaking in broken bursts as waves of emotion crashed through him. "It was so loud," Stevie whispered, overwhelmed. Clarence sank to his knees so they were eye to eye, gripping Stevie's shoulders with steady, reassuring hands. "That's because they felt you," he said gently. "Every note, every tremble, every bit of your heart, you gave it to them." Stevie swallowed hard, unsure what to do with the tidal wave of praise still rumbling through the walls. "I was scared," he admitted, voice cracking. Clarence smiled softly. "Being scared means you care, and caring is what makes an artist." Stevie lowered his head, absorbing those words as if they were oxygen filling a starved lung. A handful of Motown staff and musicians gathered around, each wearing the same stunned expression, the look of people who had just witnessed a spark of something impossible. A young backup singer knelt beside Stevie, tears in her eyes. "Baby," she whispered, "I've been singing since before you were born, and you just made me cry." Stevie's cheeks flushed warm. I didn't mean to." She laughed lightly, brushing his arm. "That's what makes it beautiful." Another musician, a guitarist who had once played alongside local legends, leaned in closer, shaking his head in disbelief. "Kid," he said with a voice thick with emotion, "I don't know what you got, but the world's gonna chase it." Stevie blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. No one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever seen him like this. Then the announcer stepped backstage, wiping his eyes. "Stevie," he said softly, "they're still clapping for you." The boy froze. "For me?" he asked, his voice shrinking to a whisper. The announcer nodded, smiling through tears. "They won't stop." Stevie turned toward the curtain, hearing the faint roar, fading but persistent, full of love, full of belief. A warmth filled his chest, fragile but growing. Clarence placed a hand on his back and whispered, "Remember this feeling, Stevie. Hold it. It's yours now." Stevie gripped his harmonica tightly, his heartbeat slowing into something steady, something sure. In that moment, the terrified child who had stepped onto the stage just minutes earlier felt a quiet, powerful truth settling into his spirit. He belonged. And as the applause finally faded beyond the walls, little Stevie Wonder, just 10 years old, took his first step into the extraordinary destiny waiting to meet him.